So, chapters 6 through 10 deal with the issue of cinema, which, of course, would have been the film, photography and cinema, right, which would have been the important media to examine in Benjamin's day. And as I said, I think that we should be more interested in focusing on the media that are contemporary to our age. But let's gloss through quickly and look at some examples, some instances in photography and cinema in particular that reinforce the ideas that Benjamin has presented to us so far. In chapter 8, Benjamin is focusing specifically on the idea of aura and how it relates to a film versus the stage. And he's saying that in a stage performance, when you go to the theater, the magic of the theater is that you are getting a different performance each and every night. Each performance of a play will be unique, and that furthermore, an actor has the ability to respond to the audience. There's a real reciprocating of energy that happens, and you'll hear actors talk about this on inside the actor's studio or whatever, feeding off the energy of the audience that they can't necessarily do in front of in front of a camera, and that feedback loop, the actor and Benjamin would argue is important, and we can also think about this in McLuhan terms, right, as hot versus a cold medium. All right, where the play is a cool medium where the viewer actually gets some input in what's happening, right? And actually even the viewer gets to sort of move their eyes about the set and choose what to focus on. And in a film, all that work is done for you. You are sitting back and simply consuming, right, with no input. You have no say on how the events on stage are or on the screen are unfolding. And the other thing that that Benjamin would say you lack in the film is the aura of the actors. That is their presence there, which you can think of as proximity to the actors, like, wow, you're in the same room as Leonardo DiCaprio or whatever whenever he's doing this play. But really, to use like Benjamin's terms, it would actually be about distance. Right? I mean, the way that actor has to project from the stage versus in a film, right? The camera can bring us right tight up into the actor's face. But that aura is greatly diminished in the film, right? Which is reproduced and which makes all these decisions for us. He makes, though, an interesting case for how the aura is replaced. And he'd alluded to there at the end in chapters 4 and 5 that when we take the ritual function away from a work of art, we will replace it with something. And film, as he presents it here, is an interesting example of that. He says that right here, this is in chapter 10, that film's response to the shriveling of aura is an artificial inflation of personality outside the studio. The cult of stardom promoted by film capital preserves the magic of personality that for years has lain solely in the rancid magic of its commodity character. Okay. So, before getting into the revolutionary language, this makes sense, right? I mean, we don't have the aura that comes with the real physical presence of the actor and the distance between the audience and the stage, but we have to create something magical. And so the film studios ingeniously produce film stars, right? Cinema, he says, essentially can't exist without stars, without celebrity. That's what we'll replace the aura with, and we'll believe that that's magic as well, right? Very, very interesting. So now, the way that these movies function in our in actors' careers and our perceptions of them, that's one thing that is replacing aura. All right, this is a fairly benign example, and it's possible that there are much more dangerous ones, but I think it's definitely a clear example. Let's move on to another point about what happens with reproducible art. It's on the same page here in chapter 10. He says here, one concomitant of it's a lot of syllables. One concomitant of cinematographic technology, as of sporting technology, is that everyone watches the performances displayed as a semi-expert. And then he uses an analogy that we could never ever relate to. If you ever heard a group of newspaper boys leaning on their bikes discussing the results of a cycle race, you will have some understanding of this state of affairs. I have actually never heard a group of newspaper boys discussing the results of a cycle race, but I think I can still understand this state of affairs. Yes, it is true that we do sort of all participate in film as a semi-expert, right? Many of us will have Oscar pools. We decide, oh, I can't believe he won Best Actor. That was nonsense. This other guy was way better, right? And we all have the luxury of discussing as semi-experts because the things are reproducible. We can see them many times, and most importantly, our friends have had the exact same experience, and so we can compare and contrast. And then, there will be some sort of battle over who can have, the hottest takes or the most informed takes or something like that. And this is just beginning to scratch at the surface of, okay, how are we as a society receiving art now in the age of mechanical reproduction? Because up until now, we've been talking about, what power exists in the work of art? How does it change? How does its function change? Now let's talk about the audience here. He goes on to say, he's moving to literature. It's sort of an easier example here. For centuries, the situation in literature was that a small number of writers faced many thousands of times that number of readers. Then, towards the end of the last century, there came a change. As the press grew in volume, making ever-increasing numbers of new political, religious, scientific, professional, and local organs available to its readership, larger and larger sections of that readership turned into writers. It began with the daily newspapers opening their correspondence columns to people, and it now has reached a point where few Europeans involved in the labor process could fail, basically, to find some opportunity or other to publish an experience at work, a complaint, a piece of reporting, or something similar. The distinction between writer and readership is thus in the process of losing its fundamental character. Now, boy, if it's 1936, and if Walter Benjamin thinks that the letters to the editor page indicates a massive blurring between who is a reader and who is a writer, wow. If only he could see the state of affairs today. So this is, this is an argument which would have very broad application in our world today. But let's see if Benjamin goes on to say what he thinks about all this. That distinction between reader and writer is a functional one, assuming a different form from one case to the next. The reader is constantly ready to become a writer. Okay, that's very true today. As an expert, which for good or ill he must inevitably become in a highly specialized labor process, be it merely an expert in some minor matter, he gains access to authorship. In the Soviet Union, labor itself has a voice, and putting one's job into words is part of the skill required to perform it. Literary authority is no longer grounded in specialist education, but in polytechnic education. It has become common property. I think that he's saying that this is a good thing. I think that he's saying that it's good that if you have a small area of expertise, you may be called upon to become an author to describe that expertise, and I think that he's saying that's a good thing, and I would probably agree. Now he's going to bring it back to film. He says all of which can easily be translated in turn into terms of film, where shifts that in literature took centuries have occurred within a decade. For in film, particularly as practiced in Russia, this sort of shift has already in places been accomplished. Some of the actors encountered in Russian films are not actors in our sense, but people who portray themselves and do so primarily through their labor. In Western Europe, capitalist exploitation of film bars modern man's legitimate claim to be reproduced from being taken into consideration. Ooh boy, that would change, because now we are all film stars, aren't we? It would be very interesting to take these ideas and apply them to, say, Andy Warhol. Another idea for your essay. Given the circumstances, the film industry has every interest in arousing the participation of the masses by means of illusory presentations and suggestive speculations. So he's saying that, you know, Hollywood will pretend to represent you, but they don't. At this time, there's no chance for the average person to be a film star. So, again, very interesting applications to our world today. But we're talking about, fundamental shifts, and he's not just talking about who is a writer and who is a reader. It is who is a creator of artwork, or, you know, as we might say today, a creator of content. And the answer is that, you know, maybe it has the potential to be everybody. And it turns out that he's, you know, pretty much right about this. Let's talk about another way that we receive artwork. In chapter 12, this is where we're going to sort of pick up a closer reading again. In chapter 12, he says, "The fact that the work of art can now be reproduced by technological means alters the relationship of the mass to art. From being very backward, faced with a Picasso, for instance, it has become extremely progressive, given Chaplin, for instance." So he's saying that we are becoming a more progressive readership or viewership. I mean people of 1936. Yet this progressive response is characterized by the fact that in the pleasure of looking and experiencing is associated directly and profoundly with the stance of passing an expert judgment. This link is an important social indicator. In fact, the more the social significance of an art diminishes, the greater the extent, as it is clearly turning out to be the case with painting, to which the critical and pleasure-seeking stances of the public diverge. The conventional is enjoyed without criticism. The truly new is criticized with aversion. Okay, this makes sense. We like the conventional, we criticize the new. In cinema, the critical and pleasure-seeking stances of the audience coincide. What? How could this be? So this is... like, actually, people are enjoying things, like, while also being critical? Why is this happening? And what crucially makes this happen is, nowhere more than in the cinema do the individual reactions that together make up the mass reaction of the audience prove from the outset to be caused by their immediately imminent massing. And in making themselves heard, they also check on one another. Again, painting offers a useful comparison here. A painting always had an excellent claim to being looked at by one person or a small number. The kind of simultaneous viewing of paintings by large crowds that occurs in the 19th century is an early symptom of the crisis affecting painting, which was certainly not triggered by photography alone, but, relatively independently of photography, by the work of art laying claim to mass attention. The fact is, painting is not able to form the object of simultaneous reception by large numbers of people, as architecture always has been, and as the epic once was, and as film is today. And despite the inherent impossibility of drawing conclusions from that fact regarding the social role of painting, the same fact nevertheless counts as a severe setback at a time when painting, as a result of special circumstances, and to some extent in defiance of its nature, finds itself face to face with the masses. In the churches and monasteries of the Middle Ages and in the palaces of princes up until the late 18th century, joint reception of paintings occurred not simultaneously, but often in stages when it was handed down hierarchically. Where this happened otherwise, what comes out is the special conflict that befell painting as a result of the image becoming reproducible by technological means. But although an attempt was made to bring painting before the masses in galleries and salons, there was no way in which the masses could have organized and checked on themselves in the context of that kind of reception. As a result, the same audience as reacts in a progressive fashion to a grotesque film will inevitably, in the presence of surrealism, become a backward one. Okay, so some very mealy sentences, but here's what he's saying. Is that basically we like things whenever we get to feel like we're semi-experts on things. We feel like semi-experts on things, as established in the previous chapter, whenever we're more able to feel like semi-experts whenever something is reproducible, because we can see it multiple times, and all of our friends can have seen the same thing, and we can check our opinions against theirs. He's saying that what's nice about a film is we go, all right, and everyone else claps, we clap. Right on. We know it's good, and we're right. We love feeling right. They enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Excellent. You stand in front of a painting, all right, and in paintings, you typically stand in front of them by yourself or in small groups of people, and you're not sure how to feel. No one's really telling you. In front of a performance, it'd be even more difficult because maybe the part of the performance that you're seeing is different from the part that someone else is seeing, and so it's very difficult. And so you're on edge. You're disinclined to like it, and so that is why an audience in front of a cinema can be sort of more progressive. But there's also the downside is that there's sort of some group think happening, right? Is that we're sort of being sheep, but the plus side is that Benjamin is arguing those sheep have a tendency to be more progressive, and you can argue about whether or not that's the case today.